Welcome back to the Tracy Take. I'm Tyler here with my brother Ryan. Today we are going to be breaking down the Jacksonville Jaguars 2024 schedule, and at the very end, going to give our maximum ceiling and absolute floor for the Jaguars this season. But before we get into that, if you have not already, go ahead, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tackle that bell to get notified when new videos come out. We have a lot of great content coming out, and we release videos every Monday through Friday at 5 p.m. Eastern time. When the season starts, we're going to have weekly prediction videos of all the Jaguars games that you're not going to want to miss. So subscribe to the channel and also tackle that bell to get notified. And so we're going to break down the schedule here in a second. But before we do that, let's quickly recap all the areas that the Jaguars have improved on throughout the 2024 offseason from 2023. And Ryan, I would say the number one, probably most important thing that the Jaguars have improved on is they've gotten healthy. I think that was the biggest thing that really was the downfall of the Jaguars in the 2023 season. They were kind of riding high. They were doing well, but it seemed when Christian Kirk got hurt, I believe it was week 13, week 14, the rest of the offense, I think, wasn't there. It just wasn't able to make up for that. And then Trevor Lawrence kept getting hurt, and then other key players go down with injuries. And I think I say that because that kind of leads to me where I think they probably one of the best moves they made this offseason was actually moving on from Calvin Ridley and going to get a younger guy who might actually be able to bring more to the table in Brian Thomas Jr. So I think they've improved that receiving room as well. They went and gone Gabe Davis also. So I think then add another veteran presence as well. I'm very intrigued on how this trio of receivers is going to work out because Christian Kirk, I think, is a really good receiver. And he's proven me wrong from when Jaguars initially signed him for the 4-year, $80 million deal a couple years ago. But I think they've improved the offensive line. I think they have bolstered up on the defensive interior and the secondary as well. So I kind of want to throw it over to you. Which of those areas do you think, or any areas I missed, you think were probably the areas most improved by Jacksonville going into the 2024 season?
Yeah, so for me, I think just looking at some of the additions, I really am excited about the people that they added in the secondary. They added 2 safeties in Darnell Savage and Terrell Edmonds, and they added 2 corners in Trey Flowers and Ronald Darby. And I think you look, they were 26th in passing defense last year, but they were 9th in rushing defense. So they kind of have that front 7 pretty solid already. They weren't the most productive in terms of overall sacks, but I think they had a pretty decent pressure rate, which in a lot of ways is more important than sacks, because if you can cause pressure, then you're going to disrupt the passer. You might not get the actual sack, but you still cause pressure and cause the quarterback to move off of his spot. So still good numbers there. The run defense was good, but improving on the back end, I think, is definitely going to be the most important thing. And I think they definitely added some veteran pieces to set a pretty high floor for this defense. And then I think you go and look at this offense, and they have some good tackles. They just drafted Anton Harrison in the first round 2 drafts ago. They just got Brian Thomas Jr. in this draft. One of the things I think is interesting, so you get Brian Thomas Jr., who primarily wins down the field. You go get Gabe Davis, who primarily wins down the field. And then you look, they have Christian Kirk and Parker Washington, who are receivers that can win more over the field and create a little bit more after the catch. So I think I personally like to relate wide receiver rooms to basketball teams. You don't have 5 guys on a basketball floor that are 6'3", can dribble and shoot and dunk, because you'll just get overpowered in the paint. So you need to have your rebounders. You need to have your shooting guards or whatever that are the better athletes, right? And then you just need to have the guys that can make a clutch catch or two. And I think they've done a pretty good job to assemble that group in bringing it back to football now. So I all in all, I think they just did a pretty good job of rounding out some of the holes on this team.
Yeah, no, I agree with you there, especially then too. Going back to the offensive line, they did sign Mitch Morse in free agency last year, so solidifying that center spot as well. So hopefully, even improving a little bit more in some of the running game capabilities, making them a little bit more balanced. So they were 24th in rushing yards offensive last year. So, but I agree with you. I think just in general, teams got to stay healthy. But when it comes to what they did add, though, I do believe if they are able to stay healthy, just looking at it on paper, once again, I think another formidable team in the AFC, which is just crazy to think about because, and we're about to go through their schedule, they're going to play a lot of good AFC teams, but just how deep the AFC is. Like we've talked about it in other videos, like Denver and your Patriots are probably the 2 teams I feel very, very, very confident are not going to be making run at the playoffs. But you can make an argument for every team, and we're going to go through the schedule here now, but like the Jags, their ceiling, like they can be one of the top seeded teams, I think, into the playoffs here. And I just think they just got hit with the injury bug at the wrong time at the end of 2023. So, but starting off their first 6 games here in 2024 at Miami, hosting Cleveland, at Buffalo on Monday Night Football in Week 3, Week 4 at Houston, Week 5 and hosting Indianapolis, and Week 6 is technically at Chicago, but it's going to be in London. And so very, very interesting first 6 games for this Jaguars team, because if they are the team that we just said they could be just a couple minutes ago at the beginning of this video, we're going to find out real quick, because Miami, Cleveland, Buffalo, Houston are definitely playoff teams. Indy and Chicago, I think, are fringe playoff teams, and one of those teams, the 2 teams that we were talking about, like I could see at least Indy in the AFC, like I can make an argument for why I think they can go 10-7, 11-6, and at minimum be a wild card. Chicago, on paper, who knows? They're supposed to be really good. They got Caleb Williams, all the moves they made this offseason. So we're going to find out real quickly in these first 6 games. I think ceiling, could be 4-2, but I also think floor, for being honest, I think it could be 1-5. I think maybe one of their wins potentially is only Indy or at Chicago. It's going to be a tough stretch of games.
Yeah, Miami Week 1 is to me probably the toughest matchup, just because Miami over the last couple seasons in the first 5 or 6 games of the year is like, I think they've only lost 1 game, and it was to Buffalo at Buffalo. Mm-hmm. And so for me, that's a really tough matchup. Cleveland is always a tough matchup for really just that defense is so good. That's what makes it so hard. And then Buffalo, Houston, Indy, and Chicago, you kind of said all those teams are like playoff contenders, if not like expected to make a late playoff push. So no real pushovers here in this. I agree. I think 4-2 is probably the ceiling. You could make an argument that like if shit really hits the fan, they could go 0-6. But I think 1-5 is the floor I'll go with, because I think like you'd have to be so unlucky to start out 0-6 like that.
I will say I'm trying to think of this, like, let's say they don't get injured at all. I could see a scenario where Miami runs them off the field. Cleveland on paper is supposed to have one of the best defensive fronts, and you go look at the weapons that they have as a whole on that offensive side. They're going to be a really tough team to beat. It is at home in Jacksonville. Buffalo, it's still Josh Allen in Buffalo. So maybe that's one you can sneak in there. Houston last year were some great games. I think actually, if I'm not mistaken, didn't Jacksonville beat Houston last year off like a 56-yarder, or was it vice versa? I'm trying to remember, but it was like a back and forth.
I thought it was vice versa, because I thought that was like the downslide, like the beginning of the downslide of Jacksonville.
Maybe, and then the beginning of the uptick for Houston. I'll have to go back and double check.
Yeah,
but Indy division game, Chicago, as I said, so 1-5. I agree. I don't think they're going to go 0-6. I just think they'll figure out a way to win one of those games, because there's too much talent on this team to go 0-6 during the stretch. But it's possible, though. I mean, there's a lot of talent on these other 6 teams. I will say,
if you look at each individual game, you could make a case for me that like they could lose all 6 of those games in a row. I that's very unlikely. So
so 1-5 I think is a fair floor. I think 4-2 is a fair ceiling. Starting off in Week 7, your Patriots hosting them in London. I'll tell you right now, and we predicted this last year, that's going to be a win. Not only is it just your Patriots are not good, but they would already be in London for 2 weeks, and we saw this last year when they played Buffalo. But Buffalo had to deal with jet lag. Jaguars did not, and so I think they have a big advantage there. Week 8, Green Bay hosting Green Bay. Week 9 at Philly. Week 10 hosting Minnesota. Week 11 at Detroit, and Week 12 is a bye. So 5 games of this next 6-game stretch here. I will say I think ceiling's probably going to be. I'll say 3-2, because I don't think they're better than Green Bay and Detroit. But floor, I will say on the flip side, I think floor is 2-3. So I really think it's just this Philly game, because I think they'll beat New England. I think they'll beat Minnesota. I think it's really just this Philly game. So they could be running. I don't know. Do you think 4-1 is a good ceiling? Actually,
I think 3-2, because even like the New England game, I know like they have a huge advantage. We've seen crazier things happen in those overseas games. Um, for like one of those teams to be upset like that. Minnesota still has some good weapons on the offensive side of the ball. Defensively, I mean, they're just going to send the house 60% of the time. So like, there's interesting games. I think 3-2 is a good ceiling, and 2-3 is a good floor because they should win at least 2 of those games.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I agree with you there. I think push come to shove, that they'll figure out a way 2 games during that stretch.
mm-hmm.
But final 6-game stretch: Week 13 hosting Houston, Week 14 at Tennessee, Week 15 hosting the Jets, Week 16 at Las Vegas, Week 17 going up against the Titans, and last but not least as Indy for the final game of the season here. It's very unique because you got 4 division games in this final 6-game stretch, and then the Jets and Raiders, I think, are also kind of those fringe playoff teams as well. Kind of in that same boat I would put Jacksonville at. And so to me, I'll say I never played Tennessee twice. I think floor, I will say, is probably 2-4. If I'm being very picky, I don't know why this. I almost want to say 3-3, but I feel like ceiling though probably won't go up too much just with all the division games. I would say maybe 4-2 is probably the ceiling during this stretch here.
Yeah, 4 division games, you have to think they're going to drop at least one. And then like New York and Las Vegas, to me, those are complete wild cards because New York, you have no idea. New York could be a fringe wild card team, or they could be the Super Bowl favorite by the end of the year out of the AFC, just kind of depending on how that team does. So, I would say 3-3 is probably a good floor. And then honestly, but at that, I would probably put their ceiling at 4-2.
Yeah,
maybe 5-1. If
it'll be tough. I think Houston's going to be a tough one. And then after living in Nashville for 6 years, it always felt like Tennessee beat Jacksonville at least once a year. It just seemed like no matter what. Yeah, that was during the Derrick Henry era, so it's going to be totally different. But still, it just seemed like even when they came up to Nashville, like they always had their number. So, but that's all circumstantial evidence. But okay, let's go with that 3-3 and 4-2. So definitely the big portion of the schedule is going to be those first 6 games, because even there wasn't too much variance for the next 2 sets of 6 games here. So doing the math, the floor seemed like we had 6-11. I feel like that's maybe a little too low. Like maybe 7-10 might be a little bit better, but based off kind of how we broke it out. But ceiling though was 12-5, and that's where it's like I think that's legitimate for them. They'll probably end up somewhere in the middle. Those are obviously the 2 ends of the bell curves. But 12-5 wins the division for sure. And I don't say for sure, it depends on how Houston does. But at minimum in the playoffs. And if they do win the division, 2 seed, 3 seed, maybe a 1 seed if all the teams start beating each other, like how they did, like how they've done the past couple of years. But still a good seeding if you go 12-5. I think with our predictions, you had them going 10-7 on the season. I have them going 9-8. And when I look at that schedule, this team just feels like there's going to be games, and how tough their schedule is, for being honest. There's going to be games where when they go and they beat a Buffalo or a Green Bay randomly. But then I can also see a scenario where a team like Minnesota gets maybe not Minnesota, a team like the Raiders can come in and upset them because they might be a poor matchup for this team. And so just as an example, but I think that's fair. I'm curious. I'm kind of going through that 6-11, the floor, 12-5, the ceiling. What are your overall thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's a good floor and ceiling because we both had them like right in the middle of that in our actual record predictions, and so I could see it really going either way. To me, last year was like worst case scenario for this team. They ended up missing out on the playoffs in the last week. But they really are a playoff team. They've hitched their wagon to Trevor Lawrence officially for the long term. So I think they have a lot of the pieces to be a perennial playoff team. Honestly, the biggest question I have is you just look at the AFC and how loaded it is. How do they stack up to everybody else in the AFC? Because to be fair, like Trevor Lawrence he's going into year 4. He still has questions that he needs to answer as a franchise quarterback. Like this defense wasn't the most productive in terms of sacks. They had good pressure ratings, but the secondary needs to improve also. So like they still have questions to answer. So it's more just how much did they improve and where do they stack up to everybody else, I think, rather than actually debating like
well,
how good this team is.
Well, and that's where I think it's a team thing, because if I look at Trevor Lawrence, like I think you go put Trevor Lawrence on the Lions, and I think you can make an argument that he does better than Jared Goff. Like, so is he based off his compensation? Is he the best quarterback in the league? No, that's just the way that the market works. It's just the way that the business is.
Yeah.
But I will say that he's up there. He's an above average quarterback in the league, and so like if he was on the Falcons, I'd be completely satisfied with him. And I think it's the same thing. You kind of look at it with him, and then like a Justin Herbert. Like when this team doesn't have success, Justin Herbert and the Chargers. Like I don't think it's Justin Herbert's fault that the Chargers have done poorly. I can say the same. I feel like with Trevor Lawrence. I think he's done enough to me.
I agree with that.
Yeah. So it's gonna be fun to watch. I mean, this similar to the NFC North. All of a sudden, this AFC South like is really competitive. So, out of nowhere.
The whole AFC really is. I think even like the AFC East, the AFC West is the only one that's not, to me, that close. But that's just because I think the Chiefs are far and away better than most of the teams. So this whole AFC is just really competitive. Let's go ahead and wrap this one up here. If you guys have not already, please go ahead and like and subscribe. Leave a comment down below on what you thought of the Jacksonville Jaguars offseason and what do you think they're going to do in 2024. And other than that, we will see you guys next time.